It's been a long time now. Well, I know what people think when they hear Bigfoot, and I can't blame them for not believing me. Hell, I wouldn't believe it myself if it hadn't happened to me. But I reckon it's been years, and I just need to say it, even if it sounds insane. It was late September 2014, just past dusk, when I tracked that wounded buck into the deep woods. I'm a deer hunter, been doing it for 30 years, and I know these mountains near the Cascades like the back of my hand. But that night, I heard something that made me freeze. Not the buck, something else. A high-pitched cry, and then the unmistakable sound of a bear growling. I found it cornered against a fallen log, a small creature, definitely not a bear cub. The black bear was closing in, and without thinking, I fired a warning shot. The bear ran. I approached slowly, and that's when I saw the face. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. I took it home, saved its life. You'd think living out here would get to you after a while, but it never did. The work was simple enough. Hunt during the season, process the meat, sell some to locals, keep some for myself. I'd been doing it for near about 30 years by then, ever since my father taught me how to track and shoot when I was just a boy. The cabin was his before it was mine, tucked away about 45 minutes from the nearest town down a gravel road that turned to soup when it rained. No neighbors for miles in any direction. The closest thing to a phone was a landline that worked maybe half the time if the weather cooperated. Cell service out here was non-existent, had been for as long as I could remember. I liked it that way. Quiet, peaceful, just me and the forest and whatever game came through during the season. My routine was predictable, almost meditative. Wake up before dawn, make coffee on the old wood stove, check the traps and game cameras I had set up throughout the property. Most days, I'd see deer, elk if I was lucky, the occasional coyote or fox. Black bears in the fall, fattening up before hibernation. Normal stuff. The kind of wildlife you'd expect in the Cascade foothills. Sometimes, when I'd drive into town for supplies or to drop off venison at the butcher's, I'd hear folks talking about Bigfoot. Countryside rumors, mostly from the old-timers who'd sit outside the hardware store drinking coffee and spinning tales about footprints the size of dinner plates and howls that didn't match any known animal. Nothing I paid any real attention to. You'd understand that, wouldn't you? When you live in the woods long enough, you learn what's real and what's just talk meant to fill silence or scare tourists. I'd smile and nod when they talked, but inside, I'd be thinking about my grocery list or whether I needed to stock up on ammunition before the season got busy. Bigfoot was for people who didn't know the forest, who didn't understand that every strange sound had a logical explanation if you just knew where to look. That particular evening in late September, I'd been tracking a buck for the better part of 3 hours. 8-pointer, good size, probably close to 200 pounds. I'd hit it clean, I thought, right behind the shoulder where the heart and lungs would be. But the blood trail suggested otherwise. Sparse drops, inconsistent spacing, bright red instead of the dark crimson you want to see. It was still moving, probably hurt, but not fatally. As a hunter, you don't leave an animal to suffer. You track it down, you finish it, you honor the kill. That's the code. The sun was setting fast, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. The temperature was dropping quickly, the way it does in the mountains. I could see my breath pluming out in front of me. I followed the trail deeper into a part of the forest I didn't usually hunt. Too dense, too rocky, not worth the effort most times. The underbrush was thick with devil's club and salal, and the ground was littered with fallen logs covered in moss. But I wasn't about to give up on that buck. 30 years of hunting had taught me patience and persistence. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A high-pitched cry, almost like a child screaming, followed by the deep guttural growl of a bear. I stopped dead, my rifle already up, my heart kicking into overdrive. Every instinct told me something was very wrong. I moved toward the sound as quietly as I could, stepping carefully over fallen branches and wet leaves, trying to keep my breathing steady. The light was fading fast now, that brief window between day and night when the forest takes on a gray, uncertain quality. But I could still make out shapes in the dimness, the dark outline of trees against the darkening sky. And then I saw them, a black bear, maybe 300 pounds, circling something small and dark near the base of a massive fallen cedar log. The log was old, probably down for decades, its trunk thick as a car and covered in bright green moss and shelf mushrooms. The small creature was backed into a hollow beneath the log, trapped with nowhere to go. It was making that crying sound again, desperate and terrified, a sound that cut right through me. The bear was taking its time, in no particular rush. This was a hunt, and the bear knew it had already won. I didn't think. Training and instinct took over. I raised my rifle and fired a shot into the air, the crack echoing off the mountains, sharp and violent enough to make my ears ring. The bear's head snapped toward me, its small eyes finding mine in the gloom. For a second, I thought it might charge. I've had bears charge before, and it's not something you forget. The speed, the power, the raw aggression. But this one didn't. It assessed me for a long moment, decided I wasn't worth the trouble, and turned to lumber off into the brush. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth, breaking branches, and grunting its displeasure until the sound faded completely into the distance. I lowered my rifle and approached the small creature slowly, my hands shaking, not from fear but from adrenaline. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I expected to find a fawn, maybe, or possibly a bear cub that had been separated from its mother and was now being targeted by a rival bear. It happened sometimes. But as I got closer and knelt down beside the hollow log, I realized it wasn't either of those things. It was covered in dark, coarse fur, matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Its limbs were too long for a bear cub, the proportions all wrong. And its face, God, its face was almost human. Flat where a bear's would be elongated, with a broad nose and a prominent brow ridge. Big dark eyes stared up at me, wide with fear and pain and something else I couldn't quite identify. Intelligence, maybe. Awareness? Its breathing was shallow and rapid, its small chest heaving. It had a deep gash on its left leg, probably from the bear's claws, and the fur around the wound was soaked with blood. I knelt there for a long moment, just staring, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. This didn't exist, but it was right there in front of me, real and solid, and bleeding. "Easy," I said finally, though I had no idea if it could understand me or if my voice would frighten it further. "Easy now, I'm not going to hurt you." It flinched at the sound of my voice but didn't try to run. Maybe it was too weak, or maybe it understood somehow that I wasn't a threat. I reached out slowly, telegraphing my movements, and when it didn't pull away, I scooped it up as gently as I could. It went limp in my arms, like it had given up completely. The weight was strange, heavier than I expected for its size, dense with muscle, even though it was clearly young. The smell hit me then, a strong scent of wet fur and earth and something wild I couldn't place, musky and organic. I wrapped it in my hunting jacket, tucking the fabric around its small body to keep it warm, and started the long walk back to the cabin. My forgotten buck was somewhere out there in the darkness, but it didn't matter anymore. I had no idea what I'd just done, no idea what I'd saved. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't leave it out there to die. By the time I got back to the cabin, it was fully dark. The porch light was on, casting a weak yellow glow across the clearing, attracting moths and other insects that swirled in dizzy patterns. I was exhausted from the hike back, my arms aching from carrying the creature, but I moved quickly once I got inside. I carried it straight to the fireplace and set it down gently on the braided rug my mother had made years ago. It was still breathing, but the breaths were shallow and irregular. The gash on its leg was deeper than I'd thought initially, the edges ragged, and it was still seeping blood. I built up the fire quickly, adding split cedar and fir until the flames were crackling and throwing real heat. Then I grabbed my first aid kit from the bathroom, the same one I used for field dressing game and treating my own cuts and scrapes. It wasn't exactly designed for this, but it was all I had. I cleaned the wound as best I could, using antiseptic that probably stung like hell, though the creature barely reacted. It just watched me with those dark, intelligent eyes, tracking my every movement. I used tweezers to pick out debris, bits of bark and dirt that had gotten embedded in the torn flesh, then applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped it tight with gauze and medical tape. The whole time I worked, my hands were shaking. Not from fear anymore, but from the sheer impossibility of what I was doing. I was performing first aid on a creature that, according to science and common sense, didn't exist. When I finished with the wound, I gave it water in a shallow ceramic bowl. It sniffed the water first, cautious, then drank slowly and carefully. Its small hands, and they were hands, not paws, with opposable thumbs and long fingers, gripping the edge of the bowl. Then I offered it some dried venison from my stores, thin strips I'd made last season. It sniffed that too, turning the meat over in its hands, examining it from different angles. Then it took a small, tentative bite. It chewed slowly, thoughtfully, then took another bite, and another. I sat back in my chair and watched, my mind racing in a dozen different directions at once. What the hell was this thing? It looked like the stories, the ones I'd always dismissed as nonsense and campfire tales. The tales of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever name people gave to the legend. But those were just myths, weren't they? Stories made up by people who wanted attention or saw a bear standing upright and let their imagination run wild. But this was real. This was in my cabin, eating my food, looking at me with eyes that held understanding. I thought about calling someone, the ranger station maybe, or even the sheriff's office. But what would I say? Hey, I just saved a baby Bigfoot from a bear attack? They'd think I'd lost my mind. Or worse, they'd come out here with guns and tranquilizer darts and cages, and this thing would end up in a government lab somewhere, poked and prodded and studied until it died of stress or heartbreak. And then there were the hunters. I'd seen them in town just last week, a group of them up from California, talking loud in the bar about how they were going to bag a Bigfoot and become famous. They'd been drinking and laughing, making jokes about mounting a Sasquatch head on their wall. The locals had laughed along, treating it like the joke it was. But if they knew this was real, if they knew I had one here, no, I couldn't let that happen. Not to this creature that had already been through so much. So I kept quiet. I made a bed for it out of old wool, for blankets near the fire, creating a soft nest it could burrow into. And I sat in my chair with my rifle across my lap, just watching as it curled up in the warmth, its breathing gradually slowing and deepening as it fell asleep. I should have been terrified. I should have been questioning every decision I'd made. But instead, I just felt tired. Tired and strangely calm, like I'd done exactly what I was supposed to do. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the pines and firs. I thought I heard something else beneath the wind, a distant sound like wood knocking against wood in a steady rhythm. But I told myself it was nothing, just branches rubbing together in the breeze. That was my first mistake. The next morning, I found the prints. Big, deep impressions in the soft mud near the tree line, maybe 50 feet from the cabin. The ground was still damp from the rain we'd had a few days before, perfect for holding tracks. I measured one with my hand, spreading my fingers as wide as they'd go. The print was at least 16 inches long, maybe 17, and nearly 8 inches wide at the ball of the foot. Wider than any bear print I'd ever seen, and I'd seen plenty. 5 toes, clearly defined, each one ending in what looked like a nail or maybe a blunt claw. The depth of the prints suggested something heavy, something that walked upright on 2 legs. The stride length was enormous, close to 6 feet between steps. Whatever made these had long legs and moved with purpose. I stood there staring at them for a long time, trying to convince myself they were something ordinary. An elk with deformed hooves, maybe. Or a bear that had walked through on its hind legs. But I knew better. I'd been tracking animals for 30 years, and these prints didn't match anything in my experience. I followed the trail into the woods. The prints led in a rough circle around the cabin, like something had been pacing the perimeter, searching. I counted at least 3 complete circuits, maybe more, where the tracks overlapped. Then they headed back into the deep forest, following a game trail I sometimes used, and disappeared into the dense underbrush where the ground turned rocky and hard. Inside the cabin, the little one? I'd started thinking of it that way, though I had no idea if it was male or female, was awake and moving around. The wound on its leg looked better already. The bleeding stopped, the edges of the gash starting to close. It was stronger now, more alert, moving with a cautious curiosity that reminded me of a human toddler exploring a new place. It watched me as I made breakfast, its head tilting slightly when I cracked eggs into the pan, its nose twitching at the smell of bacon. I found myself smiling despite everything. There was something almost childlike about it, innocent and trusting in a way that seemed impossible given what it had just been through. I gave it more water and some cooked venison I'd pulled from the freezer. It ate, eagerly this time, making small sounds of contentment, soft hums and chirps that seemed to express satisfaction. I even gave it a piece of bacon, which it examined carefully before eating with obvious pleasure. But the prints outside nagged at me. Someone, something, had been here during the night, circling the cabin while I slept. And I had a pretty good idea who. That evening, just after sunset, when the light was fading to that deep blue that comes before full darkness, I heard the knocks. 3 of them, slow and deliberate, echoing through the valley like drum beats. The sound was unmistakable, wood striking wood, purposeful and rhythmic, with maybe 5 seconds between each knock. I'd heard about this in the stories, the way Bigfoot supposedly communicated over distances. Tree knocking, they called it, a way of signaling location or warning others of danger. I'd always thought it was nonsense, people hearing woodpeckers or dead trees falling and letting their imagination fill in the rest. But this was different. This was clearly intentional, controlled, meant to convey meaning. I stood on the porch with my rifle scanning the tree line. The forest was perfectly still, no movement in the growing darkness, but I could feel it, a presence watching from somewhere in the shadows. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, that ancient prey instinct telling me I was being observed. The little one inside started making sounds in response, soft chirps and calls that grew louder and more urgent. It was answering, I realized, calling back to whoever was out there in the darkness. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, listening, watching, waiting. The knocks didn't come again, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It stayed with me all evening, a weight pressing on my consciousness, a certainty that I was no longer alone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair by the window, rifle across my lap, watching the darkness outside and listening to every sound. The little one slept peacefully by the fire, oblivious to my fear, occasionally making small sounds in its sleep. Every sound made me jump, branches creaking in the wind, animals moving through the brush, the house settling on its foundation. An owl hooted somewhere close by, and I nearly shot through the window before I recognized the sound. My nerves were completely shot. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching through the fallen leaves and twigs outside. Not the quick, light steps of a deer or the shambling gait of a bear. These were slow, measured, bipedal, walking, not running, searching. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering so hard in my chest I thought it might break through my ribs. I moved to the window and peered out into the darkness, trying to see past the reflection of the lamplight on the glass. At first I couldn't see anything, just darkness and the vague shapes of trees. Then the clouds shifted, and moonlight flooded the clearing, bright and cold and silver. And there she was. She was massive, easily 7.5 feet tall, maybe closer to 8. Broad shoulders that would make a linebacker look small. Long, powerful arms that hung almost to her knees. Covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. She was moving around the perimeter of the cabin in a slow, methodical circle, stopping every few feet to look toward the windows, her head turning with deliberate purpose. My hand started shaking violently. I raised the rifle, finger on the trigger, ready to fire if she tried to break in. This was it. This was the mother, and she'd come for her baby. And I was the idiot who'd taken it, who'd interfered in something I didn't understand. She stopped directly in front of the cabin, maybe 20 feet away from where I stood, and stood perfectly still. Her head turned slowly until she was looking straight at the window where I hid. Even from this distance, I could see her eyes, dark and deep and impossibly aware. She was looking right at me, right through the glass and the darkness, seeing me as clearly as I saw her. I should have fired a warning shot, should have done something to scare her off, to establish dominance, to show I wasn't prey. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught between terror and something else I couldn't name, something that felt almost like recognition. She made a sound then, low and resonant, almost like humming or chanting. It vibrated through the walls, through the glass, through my chest, and into my bones. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't aggressive. It was questioning, maybe. Searching. The little one inside answered with a chirp, suddenly awake and alert. It scrambled toward the door, making urgent sounds, crying out. It wanted out. It wanted to go to her. No, I whispered, but it was already scratching at the door, its small hands scrabbling at the wood, leaving marks. The mother took a step. Closer, then another. Each footfall was heavy enough that I could feel the vibration through the floor. I raised the rifle higher, my finger tightening on the trigger, every muscle in my body tense. And then she did something I'll never forget, as long as I live. She stopped, lowered her head slightly in what looked almost like a bow, and placed one massive hand over her chest, right over her heart. The gesture was slow, deliberate, unmistakable in its meaning. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't the prelude to an attack. It was something else entirely. Something I was too terrified to recognize in that moment. I stood there frozen, rifle still raised, trying to process what I was seeing through the fog of fear and adrenaline. The mother wasn't growling, wasn't beating her chest or baring teeth or doing any of the aggressive displays I'd read about in the old Bigfoot reports. She was just standing there, her hand over her heart, looking at me with an expression I can only describe as gentle, patient, understanding. The little one was still crying at the door, desperate to get out, its sounds becoming more frantic. And slowly, very slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains, understanding started to creep into my fear-soaked brain. She wasn't here to attack me. She wasn't here for revenge or to reclaim what I'd stolen. She was here to thank me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent the entire night terrified, convinced I was about to be torn apart by an angry mother protecting her young. I'd constructed elaborate scenarios in my head about how she'd break through the door, how I'd have to shoot her to survive, how this would end in violence and blood. But I'd gotten it completely wrong. She'd been tracking her baby, following the scent and the sounds, and she'd found it here, safe, warm, fed, bandaged, and healing. And somehow, in whatever way her mind worked, she understood that I'd saved it, that I'd protected it from the bear, that I'd brought it into my home and cared for it. I lowered the rifle, my hands still shaking, but for a different reason now. Shame, maybe, or wonder, or the simple recognition of how badly I'd misread the situation. I set the rifle down completely, leaning it against the wall. Then I moved to the door. My hand hovered over the handle for a long moment, every instinct screaming at me that this was insane. Absolutely insane. Opening the door to a Bigfoot in the middle of the night violated every rule of common sense and self-preservation. But something in my gut told me it was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. I opened the door. The little one bolted out immediately, scrambling down the porch steps with a speed I didn't know it was capable of, favoring its injured leg only slightly. It ran straight toward its mother, crying out in what sounded like relief and joy. She dropped to one knee, and the movement was so human it made my throat tight, and scooped it up in her massive arms, holding it close against her chest, cradling its head with one hand. She made those low humming sounds again, a lullaby or a reassurance, and I saw her close her eyes, just for a moment. The expression on her face was pure relief, pure love, pure maternal gratitude. I stepped out onto the porch slowly, keeping my hands visible and away from my body. Non-threatening. Open. She looked up at me, the baby still in her arms, and we locked eyes. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The forest around us was completely silent, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Even the wind had died down. The only sound was the crackling of the fire inside the cabin and the distant hoot of an owl. Then she stood, cradling the baby against her chest with one arm, and raised her other hand. Not in threat, not reaching for me, just raising it, palm forward, in what looked exactly like a gesture of acknowledgement, almost like a salute, or a wave, or a promise. I raised my hand too, mirroring the gesture. "You're welcome," I said quietly, my voice rough with emotion. I don't know if she understood the words, but I think she understood the meaning. She held my gaze for another moment, then turned and walked back into the forest. The baby looked back at me once over her shoulder, its dark eyes catching the moonlight, before they disappeared into the shadows between the trees. I stood on that porch for a long time after they left, just staring at the tree line where they'd vanished, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I stood there until the cold finally drove me back inside. My legs were shaking when I sat down, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. I felt exhausted and wired at the same time, my mind spinning in circles, trying to process everything. The panic, the fear, the absolute certainty that I was in danger, all of it had been wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. She hadn't come to hurt me or threaten me or reclaim what was stolen. She'd come to retrieve her child, yes, but also to, what? Acknowledge what I'd done? Show gratitude? Make peace? I didn't have words for it. Still don't, really. I collapsed into my chair, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and relief and a dozen other emotions I couldn't name. I'd just had a face-to-face encounter with Bigfoot, not just one, but two. A mother and her child, and I was still alive. More than that, I'd been shown something I don't think many people ever see. Trust, understanding, recognition from a species that wasn't supposed to exist. I sat there for hours, watching the fire burn down to coals, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything else. Every detail kept replaying in my mind. The way she'd moved, graceful despite her size. The expression on her face when she'd held her baby. The gesture she'd made, that raising of her hand in acknowledgement. I couldn't tell anyone. That became clear immediately. If word got out, this place would be swarmed within days. Hunters from across the country, researchers with their equipment and theories, cryptozoologists with cameras and tracking devices. They'd tear apart these woods looking for proof, and that mother and her baby would never know peace again. They'd be hunted, captured, maybe killed, put in cages or labs or worse. So I made a decision right then, sitting in my chair as dawn started to break outside. This stays between me and them. No one else needed to know. This was private, sacred even. A trust that had been given to me, and I wasn't about to break it. But that resolution lasted all of about 3 days, because she came back. It was the same pattern, 3 knocks just after sunset, echoing through the valley. I went to the window, my heart jumping into my throat. And there she was, standing at the edge of the clearing with the little one beside her, its leg clearly healing well. But this time, she wasn't circling. She wasn't searching or investigating. She was just standing there, still and patient, waiting for something. I grabbed an apple from the bowl on my counter. I don't know why, it just felt right, like an instinct I didn't know I had, and stepped out onto the porch. She didn't move, didn't react, except to watch me with those dark, intelligent eyes. I walked halfway across the clearing, my steps slow and deliberate, and set the apple down on a flat rock that sat near the edge where the grass met the forest. Then I backed away slowly, giving her space, showing I meant no threat. She approached after I'd retreated to the porch. Her movements were cautious, but not fearful. She picked up the apple with those long-fingered hands and examined it, turning it over, bringing it to her nose to smell. Then she took a bite, and I swear I saw pleasure cross her face. She gave the rest to the baby, who devoured it eagerly, making happy chirping sounds. When the apple was gone, she looked at me, again. Then she reached into what looked like a pouch or fold in the fur at her side, I hadn't noticed it before, and pulled something out. She stepped forward and set it on the same rock where I'd left the apple. A gift? She was leaving me a gift in exchange. After they left, I walked over to see what she'd brought. It was a smooth, perfectly round stone, polished by water and time until it was almost glass-like. Beautiful in its simplicity. I picked it up, running my thumb over the surface, feeling the weight of what it represented. An exchange. A trade. The beginning of something I didn't have a name for. I took the stone inside and placed it on the windowsill. I still have it. I'll always have it. Over the next few weeks, it became a routine, a ritual. Every few nights, I'd hear the 3 knocks, and she'd be there with the little one. Sometimes they'd stay for just a few minutes, just long enough for me to leave food, and for her to leave a gift in return. Sometimes they'd linger longer, the baby playing in the grass near the clearing's edge while the mother kept watch. I started leaving food out regularly, apples, nuts, dried meat, vegetables from the root cellar. Once I left out a jar of honey, and the next morning it was gone, and in its place were 3 perfect feathers from a bird I couldn't identify, iridescent blue and green in the sunlight. She always left something in return, stones mostly, each one unique and beautiful. Pieces of wood carved by weather and time into interesting shapes. Bundles of herbs I didn't recognize. Once, a deer antler shed, the points worn smooth. The collection on my windowsill grew, a testament to an impossible friendship. I got bolder as my fear faded. I brought out my old digital video camera one night, the one I used to record successful hunts to show my buddies. My hands were steady now, no longer shaking with terror. I set it up on the porch railing, partially hidden behind a flower pot, and let it record while they visited. The footage was incredible, better than I'd dared hope. Clear shots of both of them, the mother's face in detail, the broad nose, the pronounced brow ridge, the eyes that held such depth and intelligence. The way she moved with grace despite her massive size, each movement deliberate and controlled. The baby playing in the grass, tumbling around like any young animal, wrestling with a stick and making playful sounds. The way she'd look toward the cabin, toward me, with what I can only describe as trust. I filmed them several times over those weeks, accumulating maybe 30 minutes of footage total. I saved all the files on my computer, buried deep in nested folders where no one would stumble across them by accident. This was my secret, my proof, but it wasn't for sharing. It was just for me, for the nights when I'd wonder if any of it had really happened or if I'd somehow lost my mind in the isolation. Word got around town that I'd stopped hunting as much. People started asking questions. "You feeling all right, Jim?" the butcher asked when I came in with barely any meat to sell. "Haven't seen you bring in a deer in weeks. That's not like you." "Just taking it easy," I told him with a smile. Thinking about slowing down, enjoying the peace and quiet, not getting any younger, you know. He seemed to accept that, though he gave me a concerned look that suggested he thought the solitude might finally be getting to me. Other folks asked similar questions. Was I sick? Was I having trouble with my equipment? Did I need help with anything? I just smiled and deflected, said I was fine, just enjoying retirement from the harder parts of hunting. They seemed to accept it, though I could see the concern in their eyes, the unspoken worry that old Jim was losing it out there in the woods all alone. But the truth was something I could never tell them. I couldn't hunt the same way anymore, not after meeting them, not after understanding that there were things in these woods that deserved respect, protection, and privacy. Things that were more than just animals. Things that had families and feelings and intelligence. I still hunted enough for food. I wasn't going vegetarian or anything, but the joy of the chase, the thrill of the kill, the pride in a successful hunt, it didn't feel the same anymore. Every time I saw a deer, I wondered if the Bigfoot family was watching. Every time I fired my rifle, I wondered if they could hear it and if it frightened them. I'd spent 30 years thinking I understood these mountains, thinking I knew every creature that walked through them. Turned out I didn't know anything at all. The forest was deeper and stranger and more wonderful than I'd ever imagined. The ranger stopped by once in early October, driving up in his Green Forest Service truck, ostensibly to check on me before winter set in. But I could tell he had other reasons. "Heard you've been keeping to yourself more than usual," he said, accepting the coffee I offered. "Everything okay out here?" I lied straight to his face and said everything was fine. Never felt better about a lie in my life. Winter came hard that year, arriving early and settling in with a vengeance. The snow started falling in early November and didn't let up until late February. Some days I was snowed in completely, the road impassable, even with chains. I had enough supplies to last, but there were times when I wondered if I'd see spring. I wondered if I'd see them again, or if the cold and snow would keep them away, drive them to lower elevations or wherever it was they went when the weather turned brutal. But the knocks kept coming, regular as clockwork, even through the worst of the storms. They'd appear out of the white like ghosts, the mother's dark fur stark against the snow, already dusted with fresh flakes. The little one had grown noticeably in just a few months. Not much, but enough that I could see the difference. It moved with more confidence now, more strength and coordination. The wound on its leg had healed completely, leaving barely a scar visible through the fur. I kept the offerings going, shoveling a path from the porch to our exchange rock, even when the snow was waist deep. It was hard work, and my back complained, but it felt important. Sacred, even. Sometimes I'd shovel the path only to have it fill in again within hours, but I'd shovel it again the next day. She seemed to appreciate the effort, always making that humming sound when she found it cleared, a sound I'd come to recognize as contentment or gratitude. The gifts changed with the season. She brought pine cones, some of them enormous, bigger than my hand. Chunks of obsidian or quartz she must have found in the high country. Once, a frozen fish, perfectly preserved, still fresh. I thawed it and cooked it. Best salmon I'd ever tasted. One night in January, during a break in the weather when the sky cleared and the stars came out bright enough to cast shadows, she did something new. Instead of staying at the edge of the clearing like usual, she approached the porch. Closer than she'd ever come before, close enough that I could see the details of her face, the individual strands of fur, the weathering around her eyes that suggested age and experience. The little one followed, curious and fearless now, no longer the terrified creature I'd saved from the bear. I stepped out slowly, my breath pluming in the freezing air, my heart pounding, but not from fear this time. From anticipation, from the strange, impossible intimacy of this moment. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. We were maybe 6 feet apart, close enough to touch if we both reached out. I could smell her, that earthy wild scent I'd first noticed the night I brought the baby home, but stronger now, mixed with pine and snow and something musky that was uniquely her. I could see the details of her face clearly in the starlight, the deep-set eyes that held such intelligence, the subtle expressions that crossed her features, curiosity, caution, something that might have been warmth. She was a person, I realized. Not human, but a person nonetheless. She reached out slowly and placed something on the top step, her movements deliberate and careful. Then she stepped back and waited, watching to see what I'd do. I picked it up carefully. It was a bundle wrapped in large leaves, tied with stripped bark that had been woven with surprising skill. I unwrapped it slowly, my cold fingers clumsy. Inside were mushrooms, chanterelles, beautiful and golden even in the starlight. The expensive kind that people paid a fortune for in fancy restaurants. The kind that only grew in specific conditions and were impossible to farm. She'd gathered them for me, probably from some secret spot she knew, and brought them as a gift. I looked up at her, and I swear to God she was smiling. Not a human smile exactly, but something close, something warm and genuine. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and she made that humming sound, softer this time, almost intimate. "Thank you," I said, my voice rough with emotion. My eyes were actually stinging, threatening tears. "Thank you so much." She hummed back, a different tone, and somehow I knew what it meant. I felt it in my bones. "You're welcome." That spring, after the snow finally melted and the forest came alive again with new growth and returning birds, the dynamic shifted again. The little one, who wasn't so little anymore, maybe 4 feet tall now and growing fast, started coming alone sometimes. The mother would wait at the tree line, a dark shape among the trees, while her child ventured into the clearing, exploring, investigating, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still watching. It reminded me so much of human kids at a playground, testing boundaries while a parent keeps a protective eye. The normalcy of it was startling, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. These creatures that science said were impossible, that the world insisted were just myths and hoaxes and misidentified bears, were just families, living their lives, raising their young, teaching them about the world and how to navigate it safely. One warm evening in April, when the sun was setting in shades of gold and pink and the air smelled like fresh earth and growing things, the young one approached the porch while I was sitting on the steps. It came right up to me, closer than it had ever dared before, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it. It made a curious chirping sound, its head tilted to one side, studying me with those big dark eyes. Then slowly, deliberately, it reached out one long-fingered hand and gently touched my knee. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds. Its hand was warm through my jeans, the grip gentle but firm. I could feel the strength in those fingers, the controlled power. Then it pulled back, chirped again. This time the sound was different, almost pleased or satisfied, and turned to run back to its mother. She'd been watching the whole thing from the trees, and when the young one reached her, she placed a hand on its head in what looked exactly like a proud parent's gesture. The kind of touch that says, "Good job. You were brave." She met my eyes across the clearing, and I saw approval there. Trust. I started keeping a journal after that, not for publication, not for proof, not to show anyone. Just for myself, a record of something precious and impossible. I wrote down every visit, every gift exchanged, every small moment of connection. I described the way they moved, the sounds they made, the expressions I saw cross their faces. I wrote about the time the young one brought me a flower, a trillium, white and perfect, slightly crushed from being carried, but clearly chosen with care. About the time the mother showed up with a cut on her forearm, deep and still bleeding, and how she let me clean and bandage it just like I'd done for her child. She stood perfectly still while I worked, trusting me completely, occasionally making soft sounds that might have been gratitude or reassurance. I wrote about the night they both came and sat on the grass near the porch, and we all just watched the stars together in comfortable silence. How the young one pointed up at the sky, making excited sounds, and how the mother responded in low rumbles, like she was teaching, explaining. A lesson about the world passed from parent to child, and I was privileged enough to witness it. People talk about Bigfoot like it's a monster, a myth, something to be feared or hunted or proven. They argue about whether it exists, whether the evidence is real, whether it's just bears and hoaxes and lies. They don't know. They don't understand. Bigfoot isn't a monster. Bigfoot isn't even really a good name for them, though I don't know what else to call them. They're just people. Different people. Wild people. People who chose the forest over civilization, or maybe never had civilization to begin with. But people nonetheless, with families and feelings and intelligence and culture. And I was honored beyond measure to know them, to be trusted by them, to be allowed into their lives even in this small way. Years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythm of their visits. The young one grew into a teenager. At least that's how I thought of it, though I had no idea how Bigfoot aging actually worked. Taller now, nearly 6 feet, more independent, but still playful. The mother aged too, though gracefully. I noticed gray starting to show in the fur around her face and hands, the same way it showed in my beard and at my temples. We had our routines, comfortable and familiar, the 3 knocks that announced their arrival, the exchange of gifts at our rock. Sometimes they'd stay for an hour, sometimes just a few minutes. Sometimes we'd sit together in companionable silence, just being present with each other. Sometimes I'd talk, rambling about my day or my thoughts, and they'd listen like they understood, at least the tone and feeling if not the words. I think maybe they did understand, at least partially. Intelligence like theirs couldn't be limited to survival and basic communication. There was too much awareness in their eyes, too much complexity in their behavior. Other animals started acting different around the cabin. Deer would graze closer than they ever had before, sometimes right up to the porch, like they knew this was safe territory. Birds would nest in the eaves, filling the mornings with song. Once I saw a black bear, possibly the same one from that first night, though I couldn't be sure, approach the clearing, then stop and turn away, like it knew it wasn't welcome here. The Bigfoot family had claimed this place as part of their territory, and they were protecting it. Protecting me. I got older. My knees started hurting more, especially in the cold. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. I thought about moving closer to town, somewhere with easier access to doctors and grocery stores, somewhere I wouldn't be so isolated as I aged. But I couldn't leave, not when they still came to visit, not when I'd been given this impossible gift of their trust and friendship. What kind of person would I be if I abandoned that? A researcher came through town one summer, a young guy from some university, asking questions about Bigfoot sightings. Someone mentioned my name, probably thinking they were being helpful, said I spent a lot of time in the woods and might have seen something interesting. The researcher showed up at my door with recording equipment and cameras and hopeful, eager eyes. He was polite, earnest, genuinely passionate about his work. Under other circumstances, I might have liked him. "I'm doing a comprehensive survey of Bigfoot reports in the Pacific Northwest," he explained, showing me maps with pins marking reported sightings. "I've heard you're very familiar with these woods. Have you ever seen anything unusual? Footprints, maybe? Heard strange calls? Any evidence at all?" I looked him straight in the eye and lied. "No, son, nothing like that. Just deer, elk, the occasional bear. Normal wildlife. I think if there was anything unusual out here, I'd have seen it by now after 30-plus years." He looked disappointed, but thanked me for my time and left, his equipment unused, his hope slightly diminished. After he drove away, I heard the 3 knocks. She'd been nearby, listening, hidden in the forest. When I went to the window, she was there at the edge of the clearing, the teenager beside her, and, my heart skipped, a new little one. Tiny, clinging to the teenager's back, big dark eyes peering out at the world with curiosity and wonder. A new generation. The teenager had become a parent, or maybe an older sibling helping raise a younger one. Family continuing. The mother looked at me, and the expression on her face was unmistakable. Gratitude. Deep, profound, bone-deep gratitude. I'd protected them, kept their secret, turned away someone who might have brought danger. I nodded. She nodded back. And that was all that needed to be said. The last time I saw them was this past spring, almost 6 years after that first night when I saved the young one from the bear. Same place, same time, same 3 knocks at the window that I'd come to know as well as my own heartbeat. But this time felt different somehow. Heavier. Final in a way I couldn't quite explain. The young one was fully grown now, nearly as tall as its mother, moving with the same grace and strength. And there was indeed a new little one with them. The one I'd first glimpsed the previous summer, bigger now, but still small enough to ride on the teenager's shoulders. Those big dark eyes taking in everything with wonder. A new generation. The cycle continuing. The mother approached the porch, moving slower than she used to. I could see age in the way she walked now, a slight stiffness in her joints that I recognized because I felt it in my own body. The gray in her fur had spread, covering most of her face and hands, but she still moved with that quiet dignity, that presence that commanded respect. She placed something on the porch step, not the exchange rock this time, but right on my doorstep. More personal somehow, more meaningful. I picked it up carefully, my own hands shaking slightly from age and emotion. It was a piece of wood, carved and shaped and polished smooth. Not carved by tools, I didn't think, but by patient hands working over many hours, maybe days. The shape was abstract but beautiful, flowing lines that suggested movement, or maybe growth. And in the center, unmistakably intentional, was a heart. She'd made this, spent time creating it specifically as a gift for me. The thought made my throat tight and my eyes sting. I looked up at her, and her hand was over her chest again, just like that first night 6 years ago. The same gesture, but the meaning had changed. Then it had been gratitude. Now it was something deeper. Farewell, maybe, or a promise, or both. I placed my own hand over my heart and nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. She turned and walked away, the young adult and the new little one following. At the edge of the clearing, she stopped and looked back one last time. I raised my hand in goodbye. She raised hers in return. Then they disappeared into the trees, and I knew somehow that it was the last time I'd see her. Not the last time they'd come. I believed they'd keep visiting, but the last time she would. She was old, I was old, and this was goodbye. I stood there on the porch, holding the carved heart, and let the tears come. I haven't seen them since, but I still hear the knocks sometimes, distant now, echoing from deeper in the forest. 3 knocks, steady and familiar. And sometimes I find gifts on the rock, stones, feathers, carved wood. They haven't forgotten me. The new generation continues what the old one started. I keep a basket by the door now, always filled with offerings. Apples, nuts, dried meat, whatever I think they might enjoy. Sometimes it's empty by morning, sometimes not. But I keep filling it anyway, maintaining our tradition, honoring our friendship. People in town think I'm just a lonely old man living in the woods, getting strange in my isolation. They don't know about the friendship I've had, the trust I was given, the secret I've kept for years. And that's okay. That's how it should be. Some things aren't meant to be shared with the world. Some things are too precious, too sacred, too important to risk. The videos are still on my computer, buried in folders within folders. The carved heart sits on my mantel, next to the smooth stones and perfect feathers and other gifts I've collected over the years. I'm old now. My hunting days are long behind me, my body too worn for the hard work of tracking and hauling game. Most days, I just sit on the porch and watch the forest, listening to the wind through the trees, waiting for those 3 knocks that tell me I'm not forgotten. I don't go into town much anymore. The drive is harder than it used to be, and I don't need much anyway. Supplies get delivered once a month by a service that doesn't ask questions. I spend my days in quiet routine, coffee on the porch at dawn, reading in the afternoon, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, and listening. Always listening for those 3 knocks. Don't tell people about the visits or the gifts or the family of Bigfoot that has shared my life for 6 years. No one would believe me anyway, and even if they did, it would only bring trouble. Hunters, researchers, curiosity seekers, people with cameras and guns and greed. This forest is their home. They've lived here long before I arrived, and they'll be here long after I'm gone. They've shared their world with me, trusted me with their greatest secret, and the least I can do is protect them in return. I still hear the knocks at night. 3 of them, steady and clear, echoing through the valley like a heartbeat. Sometimes close, sometimes far away, but always there. And every time I do, I go to the window and look out into the darkness, even though I know I probably won't see them. But sometimes I do. A shadow between the trees, tall and dark and unmistakable. A shape moving in the moonlight with that characteristic grace. And I know they're checking in, making sure I'm okay, remembering the old hunter who saved one of their own all those years ago. The journal is nearly full now, hundreds of pages of memories and observations and small moments that changed my life. I've made arrangements in my will. The journal gets burned when I die. The computer gets destroyed, the hard drive smashed beyond recovery. The videos, the proof, the evidence, all of it disappears with me. Because that's what you do for family. You protect them. You keep their secrets. You honor the trust they've given you, even after death. And make no mistake, that's what they are to me now. Not subjects of study or proof of cryptozoology or evidence of anything. Family. Strange family, impossible family, but family nonetheless. I think about that first night often. The terror I felt when I heard that baby crying. The split-second decision to fire at the bear. The shock of seeing that face, so human and so alien at the same time. If I'd known then what I know now, would I have done anything differently? No, not a single thing. Every choice led me here, to this porch, to this life, to this friendship that has given me more meaning and wonder than anything else in my 70 years. I was just a hunter, a simple man living a simple life. And then I met Bigfoot, and my world became infinitely larger and stranger and more beautiful. The next time I hear those 3 knocks, and there will be a next time, I'm certain of it, I won't hesitate. I'll step out onto the porch without fear, without doubt. I'll look into those dark, intelligent eyes and see the recognition there, the memory of what we've shared. Because I'm not afraid anymore. Haven't been for years. The fear burned away slowly, replaced by trust and wonder, and a deep, abiding gratitude for the gift I was given. The gift of knowing them, of being known by them, of being part of something larger than myself, something the world says is impossible, but I know is real, as the trees and the mountains and the stars overhead. I'm just waiting now. Waiting for those 3 soft knocks at 3 in the morning. Waiting for the shadow between the trees. Waiting for them to come back, to check on the old man who once saved a child and earned a family in return. Waiting for Bigfoot to come home.